My name is Isabel Moreau from Charleston, North Carolina, and I didn't know betrayal could be so quiet. Not loud, not dramatic, just one simple image that rearranged everything I thought I knew. It was our anniversary gala. 14 years. The kind of night people in Charleston talked about for weeks afterward. Black tie, champagne towers, donor plaques, my firm's name printed elegantly on the programs. Lucas had insisted we celebrate publicly this year. He said it mattered for our image, for business, for us. I arrived 10 minutes late. That detail still eats at me. The ballroom doors were open when I stepped inside. Warm light spilled over marble floors. Music hummed low and expensive. I was smiling, already scanning the room for my husband, rehearsing the way I'd tease him for being early for once. Then I saw him. Lucas stood near the center of the room, laughing with two donors I recognized. His tux fit perfectly. His posture was relaxed, familiar, and his hand was intertwined with someone else's. Not brushing, not accidental. Held. My best friend's fingers were laced through his like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Harper. For a moment, my brain refused to cooperate. It tried to rearrange the picture into something harmless. Maybe she'd tripped. Maybe she was emotional. Maybe. Then she laughed. Not politely. Not nervously. Intimately. The way she laughed on my couch during wine nights. The way she laughed when she told me secrets she swore she'd never repeat. Lucas leaned closer to her, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. I felt my body stop responding. No shaking. No tears. Just a sudden heaviness. Like gravity had doubled without warning. People were watching them, and worse, people were watching me notice. Someone near the bar glanced between us, eyes widening. A woman I'd worked with for years stiffened, her smile freezing in place. The donors Lucas had been speaking to followed his gaze when he finally looked up. When he saw me, his face drained so fast I almost felt embarrassed for him. Harper turned next. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her hand stayed in his. That's when I walked forward. Not rushed. Not shaking. My heels clicked against the floor, steady and loud in the sudden silence that seemed to ripple outward. I stopped in front of them, close enough to smell Harper's perfume, the one she always borrowed from my bathroom. Is this part of the program? I asked calmly. A few people laughed, nervously. Lucas's mouth moved, but nothing came out. I looked at Harper. You look comfortable. She finally let go of his hand. Too late. Her fingers hovered awkwardly at her side, like she wasn't sure what to do with them now that they weren't wrapped around my husband. I can explain, she said. I nodded once. Not here. Lucas reached for me then. Instinct, maybe. Or panic. I stepped back. Don't, I said quietly. That word carried more weight than I expected. He froze. You brought her, I continued, my voice steady, almost conversational. To our anniversary. People were openly staring now. Phones stayed down, but faces leaned in. This was Charleston. Discretion mattered. But silence didn't mean ignorance. Lucas swallowed. Isabel, this isn't... I turned to the donors standing beside him. Thank you for supporting the foundation, I said smoothly. I hope you enjoy the evening. Then I looked back at him. You can stay, I said. Clearly you already decided who you came with. Harper's eyes filled with tears. I didn't look at them. I turned and walked away. Not because I was strong, not because I had a plan. Because if I stayed 1 second longer, I might have asked a question I wasn't ready to hear the answer to. The cool night air hit my face as soon as I stepped outside. The sound of the gala dulled behind the doors, like it belonged to another life. I stood there, hands clenched, staring at my reflection in the glass. 14 years. Every memory rewound itself in an instant. I heard the doors open behind me. Footsteps. Isabel, please, Lucas said. Let's talk. Not like this. I turned. Like what? I asked. Publicly? Honestly? Harper hovered a few feet behind him, crying now. The image burned itself into me. The woman who held my child when I was sick. The man who slept beside me for over a decade. Together. I looked at him one last time. You should have told me before tonight. I didn't plan this, he said quickly. I nodded again. That's the problem. You didn't plan for me. Then I picked up my clutch from the valet stand, squared my shoulders, and walked to my car. Inside, my hands finally shook. But my mind was already sharp. Because somewhere between the ballroom and the driver's seat, something shifted. The shock didn't soften me. It focused me. I didn't cry on the drive home. I didn't scream. I called no one. I just made a promise to myself, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. You don't get to humiliate me in public and walk away with your life intact. You don't get to rewrite this. You don't get mercy simply because I loved you once. As the city lights blurred past, one clear thought settled in my chest. Cold, steady, undeniable. This wasn't the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of his consequences. I used to believe love was proven through endurance, through staying, through adjusting, through absorbing disappointment quietly, and calling it maturity. Lucas and I met in our mid-20s, when neither of us had much but ambition. He was charming, disciplined, the kind of man who spoke about the future like it was a blueprint he'd already memorized. I believed in him before anyone else did. I backed his first real estate deal with my savings. I hosted dinners for his investors before he could afford to rent a space. I turned my interior design work into a full firm because his projects needed it, and because I liked building things alongside him. We married young, not impulsively, intentionally, or so I thought. When Sophie was born, I stepped back without resentment. Lucas was scaling fast, and someone needed to keep things steady. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself we were a team. The truth is, I learned how to make myself smaller without realizing I was doing it. I became the organizer, the fixer, the woman who remembered birthdays, smoothed conflicts, hosted holidays. Lucas became the man people admired. Successful, dependable, untouchable. Harper was there through all of it. She and I met in college. She slept on my couch after her first bad breakup. I helped her move apartments 3 times. When Sophie was born, Harper was in the waiting room before my own mother arrived. She called herself Sophie's bonus aunt. There were signs. I see them now. Lucas started guarding his phone like it contained state secrets. Harper texted him, work stuff, even though they didn't work together. Dinners where she showed up uninvited. Small shifts in energy I brushed off because I trusted both of them too much to question it. I told myself I was imagining things. That's the part that still makes my chest tighten. Not the betrayal, but how hard I worked to protect them from my own intuition. The stakes weren't just emotional. Our lives were intertwined in ways that made separation complicated and dangerous if handled wrong. The house was in both our names. Several accounts were joint. Sophie's education trust had clauses I insisted on years ago. Clauses Lucas had laughed about at the time. You're always planning for disaster, he'd said. I was planning for reality. The night after the gala, Sophie was already asleep when I got home. I stood in her doorway longer than necessary, watching her breathe, trying to understand how 2 people she loved could lie so cleanly. The next morning, I didn't confront Lucas. I didn't call Harper. I made breakfast. Sophie sat across from me, quiet. Too quiet. Finally, she said, "Mom?" "Yes, baby." "Are you mad at Dad?" I paused. "Why would you ask that?" She hesitated, then spoke carefully, like she was choosing each word. "Because I saw him holding Aunt Harper's hand at the mall last month. I thought it was weird." The room went still. "When?" I asked. "After my piano lesson. They didn't see me." There it was. Not suspicion, not doubt. Confirmation. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand, keeping my voice steady. "Thank you for telling me." That was the moment denial became impossible. Whatever Lucas and Harper wanted to call it, Confusion, mistakes, timing didn't matter anymore. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision they'd been making for weeks, maybe longer, and I wasn't about to let them decide how this ended. I gave myself exactly 1 day to feel sorry for myself. One morning of silence. One shower where I let the water run too long. One cup of coffee I didn't finish because it tasted wrong. Then I stopped waiting for explanations I already had. Lucas didn't come home the night of the gala. He texted once, "We need to talk." I didn't respond. Talking was what people did when they wanted to stall. I didn't have time for that. By noon, I was sitting in a quiet office on Meeting Street, hands folded in my lap, listening to a woman who spoke in clean sentences and didn't flinch when I told her everything. Divorce attorney. Recommended by a client who once whispered, "She's ruthless in the right way." I liked that. She didn't ask how I felt. She asked what I wanted to protect. "My daughter," I said immediately. "My business. And my name." She nodded. "Already writing." "Good. Then we move first." By the time I left her office, the fog was gone. In its place was a checklist. That afternoon, I went to the bank where I'd opened our first joint account 14 years earlier. I sat across from a manager who knew me by name and explained calmly that I needed to freeze specific accounts pending legal separation, the ones tied to my earnings, the ones Lucas used freely without ever asking. There was no drama, just signatures. I didn't touch Sophie's trust. I didn't have to. I'd insisted years ago that withdrawals required both parents' authorization. For emergencies, Lucas had said. This was an emergency. I changed passwords that night. Business accounts first, then personal, then the home security system. The locks could wait until morning. I didn't pack his things. I packed mine. Not everything, just what mattered. Documents. Jewelry that belonged to my grandmother. Hard drives. The folder labeled House that Lucas never once opened. The next day, I listed the house. Not publicly yet, quietly, pre-market. I knew 3 agents who would handle it without questions. The house wasn't just a home. It was leverage. And I refused to let it become a battlefield. Lucas called that evening. I let it ring. He called again. Then texted, "Please. I don't understand what you're doing." I almost laughed. He understood perfectly. He just hadn't expected speed. On the 3rd call, I answered. "What is going on?" he demanded, panic breaking through his usual control. My card was declined. "Yes," I said. "That's intentional. You can't just do that." "I can," I replied. And I did. There was a pause. Breathing. I pictured him somewhere unfamiliar, maybe still with Harper, trying to calculate how much of his life depended on access he'd never earned. "We need to meet," he said. "You're overreacting." I smiled. He couldn't see it, but it grounded me. "No," I said. "You underestimated me. That's different." "I made a mistake," he said quickly. "We both know that." I closed my eyes for half a second, then reopened them. "Mistakes are accidents," I said. "You made arrangements." Another pause. Longer this time. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to communicate through my attorney," I said. "And I want you to stop contacting me directly." "You're serious," he said, disbelief creeping in. I looked around the house, half-packed, quiet, mine, dead serious. I hung up before he could say anything else. That night, I sat on Sophie's bed while she slept, listening to the familiar rhythm of her breathing. I brushed her hair back gently, the way I always did. "I've got you," I whispered. No matter what. Lucas thought this was about emotions, about hurt pride, about forgiveness. He was wrong. This was about control, and for the first time in years, I was holding it. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They spread, slow, quiet, and unavoidable. By the second day, Lucas realized I hadn't just made a statement. I'd changed the terrain. His assistant called my office asking why vendor payments were on hold. I forwarded the message to my attorney. One of his partners left a voicemail that started friendly and ended confused. By the end of the week, the tone shifted to concern. Money has a way of revealing who actually understands it. Lucas didn't. He'd always assumed access meant ownership. He learned quickly how wrong that assumption was. Harper felt it next. She didn't call me. She sent a message that tried to sound neutral, professional even. I don't know what's been said, but I think we should talk woman to woman. I deleted it. 2 days later, she posted a photo online. A vague, filtered image of a sunset with a caption about unexpected changes. It lasted 12 hours before disappearing. Mutual friends stopped engaging. Invitations she normally received went unanswered. Charleston is polite, but it has a long memory. People don't confront. They simply withdraw. Lucas, on the other hand, confronted everything. He showed up at the house on Thursday morning, just as the locksmith finished installing new hardware. I watched from the doorway as he tested the key. Once, twice, panic rising with each failed turn. "What is this?" he demanded when he saw me. "Boundaries," I said. "You should get used to them." He ran a hand through his hair. "You can't lock me out of my own house." "I can," I replied calmly. "And the court agrees, given the circumstances." He stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "This isn't you." I met his eyes. "This is me without you managing the narrative." Behind him, a neighbor pretended not to watch. Another definitely was. Humiliation doesn't need an audience to hurt, but it multiplies when one is present. That afternoon, Lucas's brother called. Then his mother. I didn't answer either. I wasn't interested in mediators who would frame betrayal as confusion or ask me to be reasonable for the sake of appearances. Reasonable had kept me quiet for years. By Friday, the real damage began. Lucas's largest development project stalled. Funding hadn't disappeared, but confidence had. A single partner pulled out pending clarification. Another requested a review. His name, once spoken with certainty, started being followed by questions. And once questions start, they don't stop. Harper's job didn't fire her. They didn't need to. Her contract simply wasn't renewed. No explanation. Just a polite email thanking her for her contributions. She showed up at my office that afternoon. I didn't let her in. The receptionist told her I wasn't available, that I'd requested no interruptions. Harper stood there longer than necessary, eyes red, posture stiff, as if willing me to appear. I didn't. That night, Lucas called again. This time his voice cracked. "I can't reach my partners," he said. "My accounts are flagged. People are treating me like I did something criminal." I leaned back against the kitchen counter, phone to my ear, heart steady. "You betrayed your wife and your family," I said. "That tends to change how people see you." "Please," he said, "just talk to me. We can fix this." I closed my eyes, not because I was tempted, but because I was tired of repeating myself. "There is no we," I said. "There's you, dealing with consequences. And there's me, protecting what's mine." Silence stretched between us. Then, quieter, almost childlike, he asked, "What do I do now?" I ended the call. Because the first real consequence of betrayal isn't loss. It's realizing the person you relied on is no longer interested in saving you. The second confrontation happened a week later, at a place Lucas never imagined losing control. Sunday brunch at Leclerc's, an old Charleston restaurant where reputations were built quietly over linen tablecloths and polite conversation. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, which made what happened there far worse for him. I hadn't planned to see him. I was there with Sophie's godmother and 2 longtime clients, women who knew how to hold space without prying. We were seated near the windows, sunlight spilling across the table, when the air shifted. You learn to recognize that feeling when you've lived in a small city long enough. People looking up, conversations stalling, a subtle recalibration. I looked toward the entrance. Lucas walked in. Alone. His suit was wrinkled. His shoulders were tight. He scanned the room the way someone does when they're already losing ground, searching for something to grab onto. Then he saw me. Relief crossed his face first, then urgency, then desperation. He crossed the room without hesitation, ignoring the maître d', ignoring the eyes following him. He stopped at our table like he belonged there. "Isabel," he said too loudly, "we need to talk." Every nearby conversation went quiet. Forks paused mid-air. I didn't stand. I didn't smile. "This isn't the time," I said evenly. "Yes, it is," he insisted. "You're doing this on purpose. You're turning everyone against me." One of my clients shifted uncomfortably. I placed a hand lightly on her arm, a silent reassurance. "Lucas," I said, lowering my voice, "you walked into this restaurant knowing exactly what would happen. Don't pretend this is accidental." He swallowed. "Harper's gone," he said, like it was an offering. "She doesn't want anything to do with this anymore." I raised an eyebrow. "With this, or with you?" That landed. His mouth opened, then closed. People were openly watching now. Not gaping, observing. The way people do when something irreversible is unfolding. "I made mistakes," he said, voice cracking. "But you're destroying my life." I leaned forward slightly, just enough that only he could hear me. "No," I said quietly. "I'm stepping out of the way. Your life is collapsing because it was built on things you didn't protect." He shook his head. "You don't have to do this in public." I glanced around the room, at the familiar faces, the couples who'd attended our anniversary gala, the partners who once toasted to our marriage. "You didn't mind public," I said. "You just preferred when it benefited you." A woman at the next table stood up, murmuring an excuse to her companion. The ripple spread. Lucas looked around, finally registering what he'd walked into. "Please," he said. "Let's talk somewhere else." I sat back in my chair. "No," I said. "You came here because you thought I'd soften, that I'd protect you, that I'd care more about appearances than truth." I paused, then added calmly, "That version of me retired." His face flushed. "You're enjoying this." I shook my head. "I'm finished with it." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. Then I said the words I'd been holding since the gala. "You didn't lose me when you cheated," I said, voice steady enough for nearby tables to hear. "You lost me when you assumed I'd help you recover." Someone exhaled sharply. Another person nodded without realizing it. Lucas stood there, exposed, stripped of the narrative he'd relied on his entire adult life. "I don't recognize you," he said softly. I gathered my bag and stood, finally meeting his eyes. "You never tried to." I turned to my table. "I'm sorry," I said gently. "I think we're done here." As I walked past him, I felt it. Not triumph, not anger, finality. Behind me, Lucas stayed standing, alone in a room that no longer pretended to respect him. And for the first time, he understood something essential. Public humiliation isn't loud. It's watching the world quietly agree that you deserve it. Lucas didn't disappear after Leclerc's. Men like him rarely do. He went quiet for 3 days, long enough to convince himself that silence could reset the board. Then the spin started. It began subtly. A mutual friend forwarded me a message Lucas had sent checking in, heavy with concern and light on facts. Another friend mentioned he'd been heartbroken and confused, that he didn't understand how things had escalated so fast. Someone else used the word miscommunication. I recognized the strategy immediately. He wasn't denying the affair. He was reframing it. By the end of the week, the narrative was clear. A stressed marriage, a wife who'd shut down, a friendship that crossed boundaries during a vulnerable time. No villains, no intent, just unfortunate timing. Lucas had always been good at sounding reasonable. What he hadn't counted on was documentation. I didn't rush to respond. That's the mistake people make. Reacting emotionally gives the other side control. Instead, I watched. I listened. I noted who repeated what, who hesitated, who asked questions without taking sides. Then I made one call. Not to a journalist, not to social media, to my attorney. We released nothing publicly. We didn't have to. All it took was one carefully timed clarification, shared privately with the people whose opinions actually mattered. The board members, the partners, the donors. Not accusations, timelines, dates that overlapped, messages that contradicted his version of events. Proof that the confusion had been ongoing for months, not days. That the gala hadn't been a misunderstanding. It had been a calculated risk. We didn't editorialize. We let facts do what emotion couldn't. The shift was immediate. A partner who'd been on the fence withdrew completely. Another demanded an audit. A third stopped returning Lucas's calls altogether. His attempts to sound wounded started sounding manipulative. Meanwhile, Harper tried to resurface. She posted a long message online, nothing explicit, just a reflection on personal growth and owning mistakes. It stayed up for less than a day before comments turned quiet, then cold. People didn't argue with her. They simply stopped validating her. Someone leaked screenshots soon after, not to the public, to the right private group chats, conversations between Harper and Lucas that predated every version of his story. No commentary, no captions, just timestamps. By Monday, Lucas's phone stopped ringing. By Tuesday, it rang constantly, but not with support. He showed up at my attorney's office unannounced, demanding to know what I'd released. She told him the truth. Nothing he hadn't already done himself. You can't control perception once trust is broken, she said later, relaying the conversation. You can only slow the damage. He couldn't slow it. A local blog ran a vague piece about a prominent developer facing internal review. No names. Everyone knew who it meant. The comments were restrained, but telling. Phrases like accountability and patterns appeared more than once. Lucas tried one last tactic. He called Sophie. I found out when she handed me the phone, confused. Dad says he misses me, she said quietly. He says he doesn't know why everyone is mad at him. Something in me went very still. I took the phone and ended the call without speaking. That night, my attorney sent a formal notice. All communication regarding Sophie would go through legal channels. No exceptions. Lucas's response was immediate, furious, panicked. He left me a voicemail I didn't answer. You're turning my own child against me, he said. This is cruel. I listened once, then deleted it. Cruelty is expecting someone you betrayed to clean up your reputation. The final blow wasn't dramatic. It was administrative. A donor withdrew funding from one of Lucas's signature projects, citing misalignment of values. Another foundation quietly declined to renew a partnership. A professional association postponed his keynote invitation indefinitely. Nothing public enough to fight. Everything final enough to feel. By the end of the month, Lucas's name had become a liability. Harper moved out of town. No announcement, no goodbye, just gone. And Lucas? He was still talking, still explaining, still trying to recover a version of himself that no longer existed. I didn't celebrate, I didn't post, I didn't correct every lie. Because the most devastating part of a PR war isn't the exposure. It's when the truth spreads faster than the spin. And no one is interested in hearing your side anymore. That's when a man who thought he controlled the story realizes something too late. Silence isn't always protection. Sometimes it's a verdict. The legal dismantling didn't feel dramatic. It felt methodical, which, in the end, was far worse for Lucas. Divorce proceedings began quietly, the way everything else had. No courthouse spectacle, no emotional filings, just clean paperwork, prepared in advance, filed with precision. I didn't demand anything unreasonable. I demanded what I was owed, and what I had protected years before without realizing I'd need it. Lucas showed up to the first mediation disoriented. He wore the same suit he'd worn to Leclerc's, slightly looser now. His confidence hadn't vanished completely, but it cracked every time my attorney spoke. She laid out the numbers calmly. Assets tied to my business were mine. Accounts funded through my earnings were frozen pending division. The house, listed pre-market weeks earlier, was already under contract. A strong offer, clean terms, no room for emotional objections. Lucas protested, of course. He said I was rushing. He said this wasn't fair. He said we should slow down for Sophie. My attorney didn't look up from her notes. Your client didn't slow down when he made decisions that compromised this marriage, she said evenly. My client is simply responding. Custody was next. That was where Lucas expected leverage. He was wrong. Sophie's routine had never revolved around him. School pickups, medical appointments, parent-teacher meetings. My name was on everything. Not because I'd pushed him out, but because he'd opted out when it didn't suit his schedule. The court didn't punish him. It acknowledged reality. Primary custody went to me. His visitation was structured, supervised at first, not because he was dangerous, but because consistency mattered. Sophie needed stability, not explanations. Lucas stared at the paperwork like it was written in another language. This is temporary, he said to no one in particular. My attorney nodded politely. Everything is temporary until it becomes permanent. The financial fallout accelerated after that. Lucas's remaining projects stalled. Credit tightened. Lines he'd relied on for years suddenly required collateral he no longer had. The audit one partner had requested revealed irregularities. Nothing illegal, just careless enough to scare investors away. His father called me a week later. We'd always been cordial, never close. He didn't waste time. I raised him better than this, he said quietly. I won't protect behavior I can't respect. By the end of that call, Lucas lost the last safety net he assumed would catch him. Family support withdrawn. Business backing gone. Pride dented beyond repair. His brother stopped returning messages. His mother sent one text asking me to be kind. I didn't respond. Harper tried to resurface again, once. She sent a long email apologizing, explaining, reframing. I didn't read it past the first paragraph. I forwarded it to my attorney and blocked her permanently. She wasn't my problem anymore. Lucas, meanwhile, moved 3 times in 6 months. From a rental downtown to a smaller place outside the city. Then again, each downgrade quiet, each one felt. He asked for adjustments, delays, mercy. The court granted none. By the time the final settlement was signed, the man who once walked into rooms expecting admiration now walked carefully, unsure who would acknowledge him. When the judge stamped the last page, I didn't feel relief. I felt closure. Lucas looked at me as we stood to leave. There was no anger left in his eyes. Just something hollow, something small. I never thought it would end like this, he said. I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. It didn't, I replied. It began the moment you stopped thinking it could. I walked out of the courthouse into clean air, sunlight warming my face. Behind me, Lucas stayed seated, staring at the table where everything he'd assumed was permanent had just been dismantled, piece by piece. Not out of revenge, out of consequence. The last time I saw Lucas wasn't dramatic. No audience, no raised voices, no shock left to deliver. Just 2 people sitting across from each other in a nearly empty office, late afternoon light cutting through the blinds like clean lines drawn between us. He'd asked for the meeting through his attorney, said he needed closure. That word again, as if closure was something you could request once you'd exhausted every other option. I agreed for one reason only. I wanted to end this standing up. Lucas arrived early. I arrived exactly on time. He stood when I walked in, then hesitated, unsure whether to offer a greeting. That pause said more than any apology ever could. He looked different. Thinner, not just physically, internally. Like someone who'd lost the scaffolding that held him upright. The confidence he once wore so easily now appeared forced, like a jacket borrowed from another man. "Thank you for coming," he said. I nodded and sat down. "You asked." He waited, clearly expecting something. When I didn't fill the silence, he cleared his throat. "I know you don't owe me this," he began. "But I needed to see you. to say things properly. I folded my hands in my lap, calm, grounded. You can speak, I said. I'm listening. That surprised him. I didn't mean for any of this to happen, he said quickly. I never wanted to hurt you, or Sophie, or destroy everything. I let the words land without interrupting. I was overwhelmed, he continued. I felt invisible. Like no matter what I did, it wasn't enough anymore. Harper listened. She made me feel understood. There it was. The same explanation, stripped of defensiveness, dressed up as vulnerability. I nodded slowly. Is that what you tell yourself now? He frowned. What do you mean? I said evenly. Does that story help you sleep? Because it doesn't change what you did. His shoulders slumped. I know I messed up. I know I lost everything. But I didn't think you'd take it this far. I studied him for a moment. Really looked. This was the man I'd built a life with. The man I'd trusted with my future, my finances, my child. And now, sitting here, he still believed consequences were something negotiable. This far, I repeated. You mean protecting myself? You didn't have to destroy me, he said, voice tight. You could have stopped. You could have forgiven me. I leaned forward slightly. Forgiveness, I said, isn't something you demand after betrayal. It's something you earn. And even then, it doesn't come with access. He looked down at the table. I lost my job. My family barely speaks to me. I don't even recognize my life anymore. I waited. I miss you, he said quietly. That was the closest he came to honesty. I inhaled slowly. When I spoke, my voice didn't shake. You don't miss me, I said. You miss the version of yourself that existed when I was still protecting you. He looked up sharply. I spent years smoothing your edges, I continued. Explaining you, covering for you, making you look stable, dependable, respectable. You didn't lose that because of me. You lost it because you assumed I'd keep doing it no matter how little you respected me. Tears gathered in his eyes. Real this time. I made a mistake, he whispered. I shook my head once. No. You made a choice. Repeatedly. You just didn't expect me to stop absorbing the cost. Silence stretched between us. Thick, final. What happens now? He asked. I stood. Now, I said. I leave. He stood too, panic flickering. That's it? After everything? I picked up my bag and met his eyes for the last time. You don't get a redemption scene, I said calmly. This isn't a story where the man learns and is rewarded with forgiveness. This is a story where the woman stops sacrificing herself to preserve a lie. He took a step toward me. I stepped back. Please, he said. Just tell me there's a chance. Someday. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't harden my tone. I just told the truth. There was a time, I said, when I would have burned my entire future to save you. You should have protected that woman. He closed his eyes. I hope you figure out who you are, I added. But you don't get to do it at my expense. I turned toward the door. Isabel, he said behind me. Do you hate me? I paused. Just once. No, I said. I outgrew you. And with that, I walked out, not fast, not slow, leaving behind a man who finally understood the worst part of losing someone isn't their anger. It's their certainty that you no longer matter. 2 years passed without announcement. No dramatic milestones. No grand declarations of healing. Just quiet accumulation. Mornings where I woke up without bracing myself. Afternoons where my thoughts belonged to the present instead of the past. Evenings where the house felt peaceful instead of tense, like it was finally exhaling. I moved Sophie and myself into a smaller place near the water. Not because I had to, but because I wanted fewer rooms filled with old echoes. The windows let in a lot of light. The floors creaked in a way that felt honest. Sophie painted her room a soft blue and asked if we could get a dog. We did. My business grew in ways I hadn't planned but had earned. Without managing Lucas's image, I had more space for my own. Clients followed me, not out of loyalty to my marriage, but trust in my work. I took on fewer projects and charged more. I traveled when I wanted to. I said no without apology. Sophie changed too, not in a broken way, in a steadier one. She asked fewer questions about her father as time passed, not because she didn't care, but because her life wasn't defined by his absence. She grew confident, protective of her boundaries. When a boy at school embarrassed her publicly, she didn't cry. She came home, shrugged, and said, "That says more about him than me." I smiled for a long time after she went to bed. Lucas faded quietly. I heard things in fragments. He moved again, took a consulting job outside the city, lost it, found another, smaller, temporary. People stopped using his name as a reference point. Once I saw him at the grocery store. He didn't notice me at first. When he did, his reaction was delayed, like recognition arrived late. He looked older than his age, not ruined, just diminished. We didn't speak. He nodded. I returned it. That was all. Harper never reappeared. Not in my life, not in the city. Her name stopped surfacing in conversation the way old news does. Briefly, then not at all. And me? I stopped narrating my survival to myself. That's how I knew I'd crossed the final threshold. There was a day, standing barefoot in the kitchen, coffee cooling beside me, when it occurred to me that I hadn't thought about betrayal in weeks. Not as a wound, not as a lesson, just as something that happened and ended. I didn't forgive Lucas to free him. I released him to free myself. There's a difference people don't talk about. Forgiveness is optional. Freedom is not. Betrayal didn't make me stronger. Choosing myself did. I learned that dignity isn't loud. It doesn't announce victories. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. It simply refuses to stay where it isn't valued. Looking back, the most painful part wasn't losing my marriage. It was realizing how much of myself I'd given away to keep someone else comfortable. I don't do that anymore. I teach my daughter that love isn't proven through endurance. It's proven through respect, through safety, through consistency. And when she asks what happened between her father and me, because sometimes she still does, I tell her the truth, carefully. We wanted different lives, I say. And I chose one where I didn't disappear. She always nods like she understands more than I expect. Because children learn the most from what we model, not what we explain. If there's one thing betrayal gave me, it was clarity. The clarity to walk away without bitterness. The clarity to rebuild without resentment. The clarity to know that losing someone who never truly chose you isn't a loss. It's a release. And I've never felt lighter. Thank you for tuning into the Velvet Revenge channel. Please subscribe and hit that like and hype button for more stories like this. See you soon.